We now move on to the next debate on the processing of personal independence payment applications, and I call Graham Stuart to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Davis, and it's a novel and pleasant experience to serve under your chairmanship. I beg to move that this House has considered the processing of personal independence payment applications. I'd also like to welcome, and I think he'll eventually take his seat, the new Minister to his place, the member for North Swindon. As my colleagues know, and I think across the House, people will find that he will be excellent in this role. He has great ability and compassion, and I'm sure we all wish him well in delivering for disabled people across the country. Over the past several months, I've been contacting Mr. Davis by a number of desperate constituents who feel like they have nowhere to turn. They're often severely disabled people who already have to suffer significant physical pain and distress on a daily basis. On top of their conditions, they've had to endure months of delays in applying for personal independence payments. A system which is designed to help them is instead increasing their hardship and anxiety. And I've therefore called this debate today to give those vulnerable people a voice. Mr. Davis, I'd like to begin by saying that I support the underlying principle of the personal independence payment. Under the old system of disability living allowance, half of all claimants, never had to undergo an assessment. 71% of people who received the benefit never had their reward reviewed. This meant people whose conditions worsened were underpaid, and those whose conditions improved received more than was necessary. That system was neither effective nor compassionate in supporting disabled people. And clearly, the money was not being well targeted at those who genuinely needed it. By contrast, the personal independence payment is a more dynamic benefit, capable, at least in theory, of adapting to disabled people's complex and often changing conditions and providing them with appropriate level of support. But, Mr. Davis, I have dealt with many cases locally of people waiting far longer than the target of 16 weeks to have their PIP claim processed. I have serious concerns that the administration of this new benefit has not functioned as well as it should have done in order properly to support some of the most vulnerable people in our society. When the PIP was initially introduced in the last Parliament, average delays were as long as 30 weeks. The Secretary of State rightly acknowledged that these delays were unacceptable. The number of healthcare professions since that time has doubled. The number of assessment centres has increased, and their opening hours have been extended. And I understand that this has helped bring down the average waiting times substantially, and I know that is welcome. I commend the Minister, in the limited amount of time he's been in office, and his predecessors for their work in getting to grips with the issue. But from the many letters and emails which I continue to receive from my constituents, including one only yesterday and indeed another as I waited for this debate to start just now, it suggests that there are still unacceptable delays. To highlight my concerns, I'd like to describe in detail two particular cases. After having an accident at work, Mrs. Lynn Dodds from Beverley now suffers from two chronic pain conditions: chronic regional pain syndrome and fibromyalgia. She has to use crutches to get around her house and needs a wheelchair whenever she goes out. She has a carer for 37 hours a week. She suffers daily seizures brought on by stress and anxiety. She first applied for the personal independence payment in November 2013 and had to wait 8 months before being assessed. And in that time, her condition deteriorated. She was then unbelievably told by DWP staff that she had to start the whole application again from the beginning. And devastated by that news, nonetheless, she reapplied for PIP in August 2014. She had to wait a further 7 months to receive her reassessment. The healthcare professional told her that the decision could have been made on paper without a face-to-face assessment. That's what she was told after all that time. She was then told she would receive a decision within 4 weeks. It's now been 9 weeks, and as far as she's aware, she's still waiting, though I think something may have happened in the last few days coincidentally or otherwise. When I raised the case with the DWP, I was told that the delays in her application were due to heavy workload. When Mrs Dodds inquired herself, she was informed the reason was that Atos had not yet sent her assessment forms to the DWP. She is frustrated that she is told that she must wait 5 working days for a callback whenever she phones up in order to try to register a complaint. Callbacks, which of course don't come at any time or within the 5 days. Because after her initial attempt to lodge a complaint 4 weeks ago, she's still waiting for the DWP to call back. So much for 5 days. She says that following her experiences over the past 2 years, she now suffers from depression and anxiety, and we can easily understand why. She's gone from being a wife and mother, looking after her family full-time, to being completely dependent on the care of others. I understand there are inherent difficulties, Mr Davis, in introducing a whole new benefit. I also understand that PIPs are more rigorous. It's an improved assessment process, and that will lead to an increase in work for DWP staff. But the length of time it's taken to process Mrs Dodds' claim is unacceptable and completely wrong. The second constituent's case I'd like to highlight is that of Mr Terry Reid, as it happens, also from the fair town of Beverley. He lives with his 16-year-old daughter and is unable to work because of his disability. Following a deterioration in his condition, he applied for a reassessment of his personal independence payment to reflect the change of circumstances in October 2014. It was not until April 2015 that he was given a medical assessment. Every day, his condition was deteriorating. Every day, he called the DWP to ask why the decision was taking so long. When he contacted me, he said he was at his wits' end. When they eventually awarded him the benefit last week, they didn't backdate it to when the decision was made. So even after months of delay, he was given less money than he was entitled to in order to support the costs of a deteriorating condition. Although, Mr Davis, I have only named 2 examples, there are many others who've contacted me in the last few months about delays in receiving the personal independence payment. And Mr Davis, you may be aware of the recent verdict in the High Court, where the judge ruled that the delays experienced by 2 particular PIP claimants were actually unlawful. In that case, the claimants had to wait over 7 months for their benefit applications to be processed. This benefit should assist with the additional costs of disabilities, but the delays make disabled people reliant on family, friends and carers when they want to be able to support themselves. In many cases, the delays cause added stress and anxiety, which aggravates the claimant's existing conditions. From October this year, those still claiming disability living allowance will be invited to make a claim for the personal independence payment. And that is why, Mr Davis, it's so vital that problems in the system are resolved now and that average delays continue to decrease. So I'd like to ask the Minister what steps he's taken to reduce delays in processing applications. I'd also like to know what he thinks are the lessons to be learned from the rollout so far, because October is going to be the beginning of a very large and doubtless challenging process, and what his analysis is of what has gone wrong. I'm aware there are particular difficulties in setting up and running assessment centres serving sparsely populated rural areas. But as you will know, Mr Davis, I chair the Rural Fair Share campaign, the all-party Rural Services Group. It's very easy to design policies in this place which don't work very well when serving vulnerable disabled people in rural areas where there may be few or any public transport services, and there's a real challenge in getting into cities to be assessed. I've spoken on numerous occasions in this place about the need for the government to ensure its policies are rural-proofed. It shouldn't be the case that a disabled person who happens to live in a rural area has to wait longer to receive an assessment for the financial support upon which they rely for their independence. I'd like to know whether the Minister is investigating the feasibility of pop-up assessment centres which have shorter opening hours, but which enable people living in rural areas like my constituents to be able to have their assessments carried out locally. And if he is, or if there's further work can be done, if some kind of guidelines as to what such a pop-up centre might require, then perhaps communities, such as in my area, could look at and identify premises where such provision could be could be made available. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend and congratulate him on securing this important debate. He seems to be implying that rural constituencies like his own and mine seem to suffer more delays than urban constituencies. Has he been able to conduct any research into this? Because logically one would assume that it's more difficult to employ assessors in the urban areas than the rural areas.
I can claim no such surveys myself, but the Minister, I'm sure, may be able to cast light on it, and if not, I think we would jointly request that further work is done to look at that and see what can be done to try and make sure that we have a balanced system which serves everybody as equitably as it possibly can. Now, I don't know whether this is a wise move to pick something up from Facebook at the last minute, but a constituent, in responding to a notice about this debate, posted just a few minutes ago, and I'd be interested to hear from the Minister his response to this. She's put up 8 weeks to decide if you're eligible, another 8 weeks to receive the form. You have 2 weeks to complete it. It then takes another 8 weeks to arrange someone to visit you, and a further 8 weeks for them to decide. That's what I got told this morning when I rang up. Now, this may not be the case, but this is what a constituent of mine said today. That's 34 weeks. How on earth can they justify that? We will backdate it, they said, to the date I applied, but it'll be no good then. Idiots, and that's being polite, was the word of my constituent. I hope that the Minister may be able to throw light on that and make sure that people aren't being given these messages even today, because that's not my understanding of what the situation should look like now. I'd like to conclude, Mr Davis, by stressing again that I support in full the principle behind the government's reform of disability benefit. It's right that we target financial assistance at those who need it most, and in a way that takes into account the changing nature of many people's disabilities. I also commend the government's success in bringing down the overall average processing time in recent months, albeit from unacceptable heights before. But my constituents' cases show that significant further progress is still required in implementing this reform effectively and ensuring the system is capable of handling the 1.5 million claimants who still need to migrate from DLA to PIP starting later this year. I look forward, as I'm sure my honourable friends do as well, across the House in working constructively with the government to address these remaining delays, which compound the despair and anguish felt by many of my disabled constituents.
The question is that this House has considered the processing of personal independence payment applications. It may help if I were to tell honourable members that I intend to go to the front benches no later than 5:25. There's 5 people who are seeking to catch my eye, and therefore I think you can do the maths for yourselves, but it means that for everyone to get a fair crack of the whip, it would be about 5 minutes each. So I'm not imposing a time limit, but I hope people will be mindful of that to get everyone a fair chance. Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr Davis. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I also congratulate the honourable member for securing this debate, a very important debate in the measured way in which he introduced it. I'd like to start by reiterating the point he made about the High Court ruling on the 5th of June, which, according to paragraph 93, said the processing of 2 claimants' applications for PIP was not only unacceptable but unlawful, and they had been waiting for 13 and 10 months respectively. So that's setting the record straight on this. But Mr Davis, the introduction of PIP has been beset with problems since it was introduced. I can remember in October 2012 when the former chairman of the Select Committee, the Work and Pension Select Committee, Dame Anne Begg, debated this issue and raised her concerns that with the issues, first of all, with migration from IB to ESA and the 40,000 assessments per month that were having to be undertaken then, a further 70,000 assessments estimated for DLA PIP would be at a breaking point for the assessment providers. And she raised that very rightly then, that she didn't feel that there was a capacity, and she was proven right, as with a number of other issues. Whereas on this side of the House, I think we welcome welfare reforms where we can see that there's going to be genuine benefit. I mentioned the other assessment process that's going through, and we have felt that the accumulation of those assessments has not necessarily been wise. And it really underpins in terms of what is behind the government's agenda as far as these welfare reforms are. We know that it's estimated 607,000 people who are currently in receipt of DLA will not be eligible for PIP. And in total, it's been assessed that the government will have cut nearly 24 billion from 3.7 million disabled people by 2018. There are other concerns that have been raised about the reliability of the assessment process itself and the limited involvement of, for example, Royal Colleges for specific conditions or disabled people themselves in actually determining the metrics. And the toll of the PIP process cannot be underestimated. I will.
I appreciate the Honourable Member giving way, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for securing this debate. Does the Member agree that for people with mental health issues and particularly traumatic disabilities, the people who do finally get to an assessment centre, that process can be very traumatic indeed, and perhaps that process needs to be looked at again for those particular people?
Yes, I was about to go on. I was at a meeting with Mind yesterday, and one of the people attending there was saying he was due to have his PIP assessment tomorrow, and he was terrified. He was absolutely terrified by the thought of that. And a survey of over 4,000 Parkinson's sufferers showed that about a third of respondents were financially worse off after they were diagnosed, and for a quarter of them, money concerns were having a negative impact on their Parkinson's. And these impacts were compounded by the process and their experience of PIP. So again, reiterating, Dame Anne certainly got it right 2.5 years ago, and it's a shame that the government didn't listen at the time, and to my other select committee colleagues, Sheila Gilmore and Glenda Jackson. It wasn't really until the National Audit Office report in February last year that was described poorly early operational performance and long uncertain delays for new PIP claimants, and the Public Accounts Committee and our own Work and Pension Select Committee all pointing to the unacceptable delays that were being experienced by people, that the government finally took action. And at that time, the average wait was 107 days, and in some cases, many months more than this, compared with the 74 days that was the target for completion. For terminally ill claimants, claims have taken 28 days on average, and again, they should have been taking only 10 days. And last year's report by the Work and Pension Select Committee recommended a number of things, but particularly in terms of that there should penalty clauses in the contracts for assessment providers should be used to recoup the money back from the assessment providers who are failing to deliver value for money for the taxpayer. And I'd be grateful if the Minister could respond about what monies have been recouped. I'm pleased that we're seeing progress. I mean, that's pleased for the claimants, pleased for the taxpayer, but we're still not getting it right, as the Honourable Member has shown. So 42,000 people are waiting over 42 weeks. 4 out of 10 people still waiting for their PIP claim to be processed. I heard from one woman whose partner has cancer waiting for a radiotherapy. They've been living on £113 a week since the beginning of April when they applied. And the effect of this, obviously, is also going to impact on passported benefits, for example, carers' allowance and disability premiums and concessionary travel. Another case I heard about was somebody who'd been got a full award for PIP last July, who's now been contacted by DWP to say she's got to go through the process again. I mean, it beggars belief. It really does. And although I recognise the median time has been coming down, and I'm very pleased about that, The measures that have been used to actually bring it down, and we've been hearing about them, for example, remote assessment centres for people having to travel considerable distances. I do have concerns about that. One person with Parkinson's was required to get to a 9 a.m. Appointment in Deptford from Crawley. Again, exacerbating their condition. So what steps is the Minister taking to ensure that paper assessments can be undertaken instead of face-to-face assessments? And also, in terms of the issue around the training and skill of assessors, again, what steps is the Minister taking to ensure that skilled assessors are able to interpret and under clinical evidence for a range of clinical and physical and mental health conditions are being used? And given the recent capacity issues, would the Minister indicate if they will be revising the rollout of PIP to a further 1.7 DLA claimants in October? But my last couple of points, if I could, about the independent review of PIP that was published last year. Again, within that report, it was recommended that there would be a full evaluation. There were concerns about the effectiveness of the assessment process that I've already mentioned, and it was recommended that government put in place a rigorous quantitative and qualitative evaluation strategy. So I'd be grateful again if the Minister could indicate when we might expect that strategy. And finally, and this is definitely the final point, we know that the Chancellor will be announcing further cuts to social security in next month's budget. I'd be grateful if the Minister could indicate what cuts are being considered for disability and associated benefits, including taxation, and whether the administration of these benefits will also be affected. Given that the introduction of PIP didn't have, and this is a big failing, didn't have an impact assessment, would he guarantee that any changes to disability benefits would have the necessary impact assessments undertaken? Thank you.
I will try and make myself a bit clearer that I'm going to the front benches at 5:25, and if we carry on at that length, there'll be somebody, at least one person, who won't get in. So I would urge people to be mindful of the others who wish to speak. Geoffrey Clifton Brown.
Mr Davis, I'm grateful to serve under your chairmanship, and I will try very hard. In fact, I will conform to your stricture, and my speech will be less than 5 minutes. I congratulate my honourable friend from Beverley and Holderness for securing this important debate. I'm grateful to follow the honourable lady, and I'm grateful too, very grateful to the Minister on his maiden appearance in this chamber. I had a very bad constituency case. The media contacted me about it. His department tracked that interview that I did on Radio Gloucestershire. He invited me in to come and talk about it, and I have to say, having talked about it, I am now much more reassured about the whole PIP process than I was before the meeting, so I am particularly grateful to him. As others have said, I am in support of the new system of personal independence payments replacing DLA. I think it is a much more targeted allowance. My particular constituent, Mr Stephen Smart, had to wait over a year for his PIP payment. I think we will all admit in this chamber today that in the past the system was far too slow, it was unacceptable. To wait over a year is completely unacceptable. The Honourable Lady referred to the court case. I've no doubt that the Minister and his department will have to react to that. The only thing I could say about my particular constituent's case was that had the Cirencester CAB brought it to my attention much sooner, I believe that as a Member of Parliament I would have been able to help resolve that. Indeed, as a number of other cases last year, I was able to resolve it. So I would urge my CAB to refer cases to me much quicker. I am delighted that the claims time has gone down from 41 weeks last year to 15 weeks this March. I think this is a terrific step in the right directions, and 99% of the decisions have led to an award with an average clearance time of 6 working days for those with terminal illnesses. And I take what the Honourable Lady says. I think that those with terminal illnesses are particularly sensitive, and it is quite right that that time has come down. I said that this new scheme will need to find new resources to manage the claims process, so I'm glad the government has doubled the number of staff working on PIPs, but it does come back to the point that I suspect the system is still patchy around the country. I know that there are particular problems in London with recruiting staff, and I wonder if it's the same with my honourable friend's constituency and maybe in my own constituency. Perhaps the Minister will be able to say something about that, although we did discuss this in the meeting, and I think we do come under his constituency of Swindon, and I think we are one of the better performing. So hopefully my experience in the past has now got considerably better today. Finally, with regards to my constituents, as I've said, it's regrettable that I was not contacted much earlier in the process so that I would have had time to act on his behalf. As others have said, the trials of this whole scheme will go nationwide in October, and then hopefully the transition will be complete for those 1.5 million people early in this Parliament. I think that would be a great milestone when we get everybody onto the new system so that it is properly targeted, they're getting the benefits that they should have, they're able to apply in the worst cases, not only are they able to apply, but they're able to get help in their own home in the most severe cases. And I think we must be sensitive to that, because for some people filling in this form is quite difficult. So I do welcome the Minister's assurance on that. If things go really well, there is an appeals process to the tribunal, and I would urge the Minister, particularly on a further appeal to the upper tribunal. I've known cases where not only in PIP payments, but appeals to the upper tribunal can take an interminably long time. I think my honourable friend needs to look at that to make sure that we do need to make sure that everybody in every government process has a reasonable appeal, because things don't always go right, and whether things do go wrong, I think people need to feel that they've got a realistic mechanism of having things put right if they have a justifiable case. I do absolutely take the case about people with mental health. I think it's often very difficult to diagnose mental health, and I think the assessors need to be particularly sensitive to that. Mr. Davis, I'm wary of your stricture. Thank you for allowing me to speak in this debate.
Nick Thomas Simmons.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davis. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I also thank the Honourable Member for Beverley and Holderness for securing this very important debate. I just want to bring to the Minister's attention some very particular issues that have been brought to me by my constituents in Torfaen who have been suffering from Parkinson's disease. As the Minister will be aware, Parkinson's is a progressive, incurable disease. It's also a disease that presents some obvious symptoms, such as, for example, the tremor, but it's also a disease that presents very non-obvious symptoms too, such as dementia, depression, and often the pain as well. And it's against that background that I make these particular points. Because in the first instance, Mr. Davis, there has been the issue of the delays which were put by my honourable friend, the member for Oldham East and Saddleworth. But of course, in the case of people with Parkinson's disease, the very stress and anxiety that is caused by that delay is a very great problem too, and exacerbates the disease. So I would ask the Minister, first of all, to consider, in addition, of course, to backdating the awards after the delays, which has been done, whether the Minister would consider apologising to those people who've suffered, in addition to their disease, by that delay. Secondly, the nature of the assessment process itself. Now, the Department for Work and Pensions' own guidance states that where there is sufficient medical evidence, that the assessment should take place on paper. But unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be widely known throughout the system. And there is, so I'm told by some of my constituents, a norm still that a face-to-face assessment is to be expected. So what steps can the Minister take to ensure that that guidance, which is of some antiquity now, is known to staff throughout the system, which clearly will be helpful not only to the people who are seeking to claim themselves, but will also relieve the burden in terms of assessment if less people actually have to go to the assessment centres themselves. And thirdly, I would raise the issue of consistency. There is, as the Minister will also be aware, what are known as informal observations. In other words, people being observed as they are actually approaching the assessment centre itself. What they are carrying is often, for example, taken into account. Will there be a robust system ensuring that there is still a set of objective criteria used, even when those kind of informal observations are taken into account? They should, of course, be evidence-based in any assessment. And I'm wary of your strictures about time, Mr Davis, so I'll just finish by making this point, that how confident is the Minister going forward, not only in the robustness of the system, as more and more people, as the Honourable Member for Beverley and Holderness pointed out, migrate from long-term disability living allowance to the personal independence payment, to cope with that so as not to have the scale of the delays we've had in the past. But in addition, that the system is sensitive to the very particular conditions, particularly progressive and incurable conditions that people suffer, and also what steps can the Minister take to ensure that assessors like Atos and Capita are gathering the information which enables them to be sensitive to those particular conditions.
Sue Hayman.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. And I also would like to thank the Honourable Gentleman for calling this important debate, because like him, I've also had many constituents who've contacted me because they're really worried and distressed about the transfer from DLA to PIP and the delays that have been taking place. And my constituency, Workington, is in the northwest, and the northwest of England has been particularly hard hit by these delays and has led to what I believe an unacceptable number of my constituents living in real financial hardship. I'd also like to reiterate the issue of particular problems in rural areas, as again we do have very poor public transport in my constituency. And I know that improvements have been made to the system, and I'm pleased about that. And I'm also aware that the Minister had confirmed this week that the average claimant wait was 7 weeks for PIP assessments, which was down from the 16-week target that had been set by the Secretary of State. So while I welcome these long-awaited improvements, I would ask the Minister to clarify whether this 16-week target covers the whole process. And by that I mean from the applicant's request to when the final decision is made. And in January of this year, the Minister also confirmed that DWP would implement the full PIP rollout in a way that is commensurate with capacity, and that, and I quote, claimants will be randomly selected on a postcode basis where we are confident that capacity exists. It would be very helpful to know exactly how this is being assessed and how capacity across all parts of the system will be maintained. As has already been mentioned, from October this year, we're going to come into the most challenging phase of reassessments of current people in receipt of DLA. In addition, as well as dealing with new claims and with the fixed award DLA claims that are ending, the Department's also going to have to manage the PIP awards that are ending and the rollout of indefinite awards. I would like assurance that the government has taken this into account when assessing the capacity, so that we're not going to start going backwards again and return to the delays and unacceptable waits for assessments and decisions. It's also important to recognise that PIP is a gateway to other areas of support, for example, tax credits and carers allowance, and people can't access these other benefits until they've had a decision about PIP. And then, of course, the problem is, particularly with the delays that have been happening, is while PIP is backdated to the date the claim was made, the other benefits aren't. I believe this is grossly unfair, and I'd like to ask why this has to be the case and whether or not the Minister would consider reviewing this. But what really concerns me, and what I genuinely fail to understand, is how when the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions told us that PIP was created to ensure that the most vulnerable people in our society would get proper support for the extra costs that have to be borne through long-term illness and disability, that my constituents feel quite genuinely that they are being punished and victimised because they are unwell or disabled. I've had people in tears on the doorstep because they're genuinely frightened for their future. So we need to look at how the department manages people. And finally, I would just like to mention some of the language that's used when discussing PIP and disability allowances. The Prime Minister, when replying to a question from my right honourable friend, the member for East Ham, on the 3rd of June on cutting disability benefits, said, "What we have actually done is to increase benefits paid to disabled people by bringing in PIP, which is more generous to those who are most disabled." Well, whether this is actually true or not is open to challenge, but what I want to look at is that phrase, most disabled. Redefining people as most disabled is incredibly unpleasant, in my opinion, because so much hints on some form of recovery, and this is something medical practitioners have also commented on. And how do we judge someone who is most disabled? In the same way we assess whether someone with a learning disability is more mobility impaired than a person who can walk 25 metres? So I'd like to know how the government calculates that people with the most severe disabilities have had an increase, either in overall terms or in benefit levels. Disabled and ill people want to be part of society. They are part of society. And they want to work. And I don't believe they deserve to be treated in the way they have. And I'd like the Minister to be able to reassure people on these benefits that he understands their needs and that they will be treated with the respect and compassion, as my honourable member opposite mentioned earlier, that they deserve as he continues to roll out PIP.
Mrs Madeline Moon.
Did I keep
Mr Davis, I'll be as quick as I can. I want to declare an interest as the past chair of the Motor Neurone Disease All-Party Group and vice chair of the Parkinson's Disease All-Party Group in the last Parliament. I also have to declare an interest because my late husband, who died recently of motor neurone disease, a condition called Pick's disease, was in receipt of personal independence payment. I don't think we can stress enough how PIP provides a financial lifeline for people with conditions such as Parkinson's and motor neurone disease, which both bring huge increased costs to daily living. Whether it's the need for constant heating, the additional laundry costs, the equipment that you need to buy, the aids and adaptation to make your home livable in, the food that is wasted as you try and find food that they can eat and that they can swallow, the transport costs of being able to keep a normal life, to get people out of the home and to access daily living, the change in clothing as weight changes. They're just a few of the huge costs, never mind the stress and the anxiety that others have referred to, that make the processing of that PIP change, the change to PIP, so essential to get right. They create anxiety on a daily basis, not just for the sufferer, but also their carers. Those carers who carry on caring while being denied access to carers' allowance because the PIP process hasn't been completed. If you're making a visual assessment, the outward signs can vary depending on the progress of the condition. It can include in the early stages simply slowness and stiffness in moving, breathing and walking difficulties, incontinence, a loss of speech or a slurring of speech. But the less visible signs are pain, depression, anxiety and memory loss, all of which are exacerbated when the process goes slowly. I'll remind members that a diagnosis of motor neurone disease can lead to death within 1 year in some conditions. So a delay in the process can mean that someone can actually die before they access the benefit. I want to stress the importance of paper-based assessments for people with these long-term conditions from which there is no relief, there is no going back. The condition, once diagnosed, is a death sentence, and it is a nonsense that people are still being called in for face-to-face assessments. It is also a nonsense that people are being given assessments in places that are difficult to assess across perhaps a town or across a country area, where when they get there, there are difficulties of accessing long distances to walk or steps to climb. So that actually when they get to the assessment, the fact that they've suffered the pain, anxiety and difficulty of getting there, they're actually told, oh, well, you're obviously well enough because you've managed to get here. It is an absolute nonsense. Will the Minister commission a detailed review of delays and problems with PIP ahead of the independent review that's due in 2016? Lord Freud said in the other place that the government has speeded up the PIP process by giving paper assessments for those with incurable and progressive conditions. We all welcome that, but the evidence is that that is not happening. Will the Minister please make an assessment with providers and make sure they adhere to the policy, and will he report back to the House on progress? I most certainly will.
Geoffrey Clifton Brown.
I had a constituent, Les Halpin, who had motor neurone disease, and I'm sure she was at the gathering yesterday of MND, and he told me he got a death sentence of between 6 and 2 years. It's just that simple. listening to the Honourable Lady, and it's a dreadful disease, all the organs of the body close down one by one,
Yes.
but except the brain. Would the Honourable Lady and would the Minister consider perhaps giving more guidance to the assessors so that once a disease like that is diagnosed, they have detailed notes on their IT systems of how it's likely to progress?
Madeline Moon.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that intervention. It ought to automatically mean that such a diagnosis means a paper assessment and a rapid assessment, because people are facing a death sentence. Their carers need to be given the financial support to help cope with the horrible life that is ahead of them, and I promise you, it is a horrible life. Finally, will the Minister meet with Parkinson's UK and the Motor Neurone Disease Association to hear firsthand the difficulty the people with these conditions are facing and the difficulties that PIP assessment is adding to their daily lives? Thank you, Mr Davis.
Kate Green.
Mr Davis, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I congratulate the Honourable Member for Beverley and Holderness in bringing forward this important debate, and I'm very pleased to congratulate the Minister too and welcome him to his new position. As we've heard, this is an important debate for many of our constituents. Many of them have applied for PIP and experienced long delays, anxiety and hardship. We've heard this afternoon, Mr Davis, of the recent case of Ms C and Mr W, where it was found that the delays were in fact unlawful. And it is regrettable that we have not yet had any expression of apology from the government for those delays. I very much hope the Minister will take the opportunity this afternoon to offer that apology. Many of us, Mr Davis, will know from our own constituencies of cases that have taken a very long time for assessment and decisions to be made. In my own constituency, I've had at least one case in which the waiting time end-to-end was more than a year and where compensation had to be paid by the department. And whilst I think we've all this afternoon welcomed the improvements in the assessment and processing time that we've seen since the benefit was first introduced, including very welcome improvements to speed up assessments for special rules terminal illness cases and including cancer cases, and the figures that we've seen today from the department, which show further improvements, a 15-week end-to-end time now for new claims and 11 weeks for reassessments. I think we have to recognise that these improvements have been achieved because of a significant increase in the number of healthcare professionals and fewer face-to-face assessments than had been envisaged. In fact, this represents a very significant policy change on the part of the department. One of the early criticisms that was made by them on coming into government in the last Parliament was that DLA had lacked these face-to-face assessments and that this was to be one of the marks of a new approach under PIP. Nonetheless, I think we are pleased to see the improvements that have been achieved, but as has been noted this afternoon, ministers now face a very significant new challenge in embarking on the mass migration of existing DLA cases, which are due to be migrated from disability living allowance to PIP. 1.5 million such cases due to commence that migration from this October. And as the independent reviewer, Paul Gray, has said, this represents the most challenging phase of the rollout of the benefit. It's not just challenging for the department and the assessment companies, it's causing, again, uncertainty and anxiety among many existing disability living allowance recipients. And uncertainty too, Mr Davis, for the public purse, the Office for Budget Responsibility, who have already revised spending forecasts upwards by £1 billion per annum between 2014 and 2015, said in the Welfare Trend report last week that structural changes to welfare benefits, and that would mean things like a migration from disability living allowance to the new benefit PIP, mean that any spending forecasts that are made are subject to, and I quote, even greater uncertainty. It is really important, as we have heard, that this mass migration is not watched or rushed. That really is very much the lesson both from the earlier phases of the rollout of this benefit and indeed from the rollout of other benefits with intrinsic assessment processes, particularly the work capability assessment. Now, the Minister, in a written answer to my parliamentary question 1541 on the 15th of June, has said that rollout will be commensurate with capacity and on a postcode basis. I have to say that that still causes a great deal of anxiety to claimants. They're not sure where they fit in that postcode lottery, and it's not clear either what it means either for the overall profile for public spending on the benefit or the end date for the migration process. And I wonder if the Minister could say if he is absolutely able to assure us that there will be sufficient capacity, both within the department and among the independent assessors, and what extra cost is being incurred to ensure that that capacity is sufficient. How many face-to-face assessments, or what proportion of assessments does he expect to be on a face-to-face basis as we embark on this migration? How many home visits? And what use is the department being able to make of the opportunity to share information from other assessment processes, something suggested by Paul Gray? The Honourable Member for the Cotswolds rightly highlighted the issue of appeals. It has been assumed that 40% of cases will go to appeal, a very high level of cases, Mr Davis. I hope the Minister can assure us not just that the Department for Work and Pensions, but also the Courts and Tribunals Service will be able to handle the appeals that are expected. Can he say how many people are now expected to lose benefit or receive a lower payment than they did under disability and living allowance? We know from Motability that so far 40% already have lost the higher rate mobility award and therefore lost their Motability vehicles, and it would be interesting to know what further forecast the Minister makes. Most worrying, as my honourable friend the member for Oldham East and Saddleworth said, is the backdrop to all this of the £12 billion of welfare cuts. Indeed, I think Newsnight suggested yesterday it could be as much as £15 billion of welfare cuts, and what those cuts might mean for the rollout of personal independence payment. In the House of Lords, on the 10th of June, Baroness Campbell of Surbiton pointed out that the Prime Minister had said during the general election campaign that PIP would be enhanced and protected, but in response, the noble Lord Freud only confirmed that disabled people would be, and I quote, supported, not quite the same thing. And as has already been pointed out in the House of Commons, in this House, on the 3rd of June, in response to a question from my right honourable friend, the member for East Ham, the Prime Minister failed to rule out cuts to disability benefits, and he indeed made the claim that the government had increased benefits paid to disabled people by introducing PIP, which he said was more generous to the most disabled. I must say, Mr Davis, that's a startling statement, given that there's been no change in the top rate of payment between PIP and DLA, that, as I've said, 40% have already begun to lose higher rate mobility, and overall the government introduced the benefit with an intention of a 20% budget cut. Yes, of course, I'll give way.
Giving way. A little patience might be useful, might it not? We've heard in this debate about the very vulnerable people who rely upon this payment. And rather than sort of shroud waving and trying to second-guess the Chancellor and what might be announced on the 8th of July, might it not just be better not to worry people who might already be worried still further?
Well, I think, Mr Davis, what would probably cause the most reassurance to disabled people would be if the Minister could categorically say this afternoon that PIP will not be subject to the proposed £12 billion of cuts, and perhaps he'll take that opportunity today. Finally, Mr Davis, I wonder if the Minister can say what progress has been made with the independent reviewers' recommendations. Paul Gray highlighted it as a jointed claimant journey, a lack of trust in the process, lack of transparency, and the nonsense of so-called interventions, which means starting a new assessment process pretty well as soon as the last one has been decided, and proposed a series of actions to address some of these concerns. And we've also heard of ongoing operational problems with venues, inaccessible or long journeys, difficulties in rural areas. Sheffield Citizens Advice Bureau have particularly highlighted problems with that. We've heard about inappropriate expertise or behaviour from assessors, highlighted in a recent report from Inclusion Scotland, and delays, as were highlighted, I think, by one of the speakers this afternoon, where circumstances change in the middle of the claim. So I'm very grateful for the chance to ask the Minister these questions, Mr Davis. This is the major challenge, I think, facing the department now in relation to disability benefits, and the history isn't entirely encouraging. We need to know that lessons are being learnt, and we all look forward to the Minister's response.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Davis. It's an absolute pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, especially as you were the first to invite me to come and do an official visit to your constituency. I'm very much looking forward to that. Whether I'll be invited a second time, we'll wait to see. And it's a real credit, the tone and the constructive, proactive nature of this debate. It's such an important subject. There is a lot of first-hand experience that will help shape the way that I will take this forward, and I'm very grateful for that today. And I will try to respond in the very limited time that I've got to as many of the points that have been raised. If I have missed something, then we will then follow up after this debate. And it's a real credit to the honourable friend for Beverley and Holderness, who is widely respected for standing up for his constituents, particularly challenges with representing a rural community. And he has done a real good service today. And I am delighted that the particular cases that were highlighted at the beginning of his contribution are probably now, we believe, have been resolved. But the principle was absolutely right to highlight. Now, this is my first debate as the Minister for Disabled People. I'm very proud as a Conservative that in 1995, it was under William Hague as the then Minister, we introduced the Disability Discrimination Act. We've made a very clear commitment to halving the disability employment gap. I think that's something that we would all welcome and support. And it's a role where I know that I can make a tangible difference. I've spent a huge amount of time already in this role, engaging and working with stakeholders, numerous visits. And during my 5 years previously as a constituency MP, I've done a huge amount with local organisations, charities and businesses acting in that area. And the one big theme that I get when I talk to people is they are enthused about opportunity, and particularly about an opportunity to work. Only this morning I met with Liz Sayes of Disability Rights UK, who said, too often disabled people are seen as recipients when all they want is to be net contributors. And this was brought home to me when I went to the fantastic charity Whiz Kids, and I met the Kids Board ambassadors, George Fielding, who's the chair, and Kaylee Miller. In fact, George is a politics student. He knows more about politics than all of us, so he'll come and take our jobs before too long. And they made it very clear to me that they want to focus to give them the same opportunities that their friends enjoy in terms of going to work. They both have got fantastic career prospects. And as a former employer who has employed people with disabilities, I would have snapped them up without hesitation. Now, it's important to reflect why we are doing what we're doing. There was a real need for reform. Under DLA, it was too often a crude, blunt instrument to provide support. Only 6% of claimants actually had a face-to-face assessment. 50% were assessed without any medical evidence, and 71% of people were given an indefinite award. Yet 1 in 3 will have their circumstances change within 12 months. Now, that could have been that their circumstances got worse and they weren't getting appropriate support. The system needed to be changed. Now, with PIP, this considers how impairment affects a person's life rather than labelling individuals on the basis of their impairments. This rightly recognises that every disability is unique, that through the face-to-face assessment there is an opportunity to articulate their own individual challenges that you just simply can't do purely on a paper-based form. And through my visits, I've had that repeated to me, how important that is. And trained healthcare professionals can actually then tease out exactly what support is needed. And I've sat through one of those assessments in my constituency of Swindon, and they do it in a fantastic manner, actually trying to be supportive. And I understand the comments that people are nervous. I'm keen to see a lot more videos put online so people can see in advance of what they would come to expect. I think that's an important message that's come forward today, and I want to see more work done on that. And crucially, this system will pick up on things like mental health conditions, people with learning disabilities that, again, it was felt that the DL paper system just simply didn't pick up on. And there is broad stakeholder support for that. And we are seeing the most vulnerable people, the people who need the most support. We are looking at 22% of people who go through the system would expect to get the highest rate of support, whereas under DLA, that was only 16%. Now, rightly, members have highlighted that there have been delays. In some cases, that is clearly unacceptable. But there has been a huge amount of work, both of the department, the providers, my predecessor, and I personally, I think I'm having 2 or 3 meetings a day on PIP. I think I'm beginning to dream about it. And the headlines are that we've quadrupled the healthcare professionals. And again, I went to Cardiff to go and sit through the entire journey of a claimant. And that's something that I will continue to look closely at to try and find ways to improve that journey process. We've got over 200 more assessment rooms. We've doubled the number of DWP staff, and the productivity for the decision makers in the initial stages was about 4 cases a day. That's up to about 8 cases a day, making a big difference. The IT systems have been improved. They're a lot more reliable. That was greatly welcomed when I attended a Q&A with the staff in Cardiff. And also there's a lot more prompts in the system now, so if they're writing repetitive things, it will pick up on that, and again, that improves productivity. But also communications. Because the letters are being improved to remind people of the types of evidence that they need to bring in so that the system will flow more smoothly for them. And we are being proactive. So where they are sent the forms for them to fill in, we would expect them to be returned within 28 days. If after 20 days we haven't heard, the system automatically triggers 2 telephone calls to remind them, a letter to remind them. We're now looking at SMS text messaging, trying to be proactive. And this is making a big difference. We're significantly clearing the backlog. Every month, month on month, since August 2014, we have seen cases being cleared. Between January and April this year, we are clearing about 71,000 cases against 52,000 new claims coming into the system. So we are clearing cases at 4 times the rate that we did in January 14.
Neil Drake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the Minister for giving way, and also welcome him to his place. And I appreciate the statistics that he's rolling out, but I don't think that is reflected in the comments that I'm getting from my constituents, and there are concerns that these delays will continue. And in that vein, will the Minister consider supporting the devolution of all welfare powers to the Scottish Parliament through the Scotland Bill process, which would be supported by Enable Scotland and by Inclusion Scotland, and consider delaying the PIP rollout across Scotland until that process is completed?
Minister.
Well, my job is to continue with the rollout. Greater minds than mine are continuing talks on that, and it may very well be that that will be something that will be devolved, but we'll let greater minds that represent both of us decide that. The average claimant now is waiting. Their waiting time has been reduced by about 3/4 since June 14. So now we're looking at a new claimant waiting just 5 weeks for an assessment, and if you're going through as a reassessment, that's now down to 4 weeks. And crucially, for the whole journey time, the medium now is looking for end-to-end at 11 weeks, a considerable improvement. And as we are proceeding now, having cleared the significant amounts of the backlog, we would expect to be operating as business as usual, and that is very welcome. And on the terminally ill people, and this was highlighted, we are now down end-to-end at 6 days, with 99% getting claims. Now, I am conscious of time, so I will try to rattle through. I won't actually, I'm afraid, because I've only got a very short period of time. The legacy cases, we've made sure they're a priority, though they are unique and complex, and often cases that are brought to me are not black and white. We have to recognise that everybody's application is unique. There are complicated bits of medical evidence, and sometimes people choose to reschedule their appointments themselves. Sometimes people choose to fail to attend. They're in hospital, which makes it difficult for face-to-face assessments, or they're in prison. But we are making a priority clearing any legacy cases. Now, the Honourable Friend for Beverley and Holderness, a strong voice for his constituents, rightly highlighted the need to tackle delays. I think we've demonstrated we're making good progress on there, but it's something I will continue to keep a close eye on. And in terms of rural coverage, that we are having to look at, we've increased the number of assessments. The rule at the moment is you travel within 60 minutes on a car, for which most people do 90 minutes on public transport in rural constituencies, and I know there's a particular challenge in Hull, and the Honourable Member for North Devon, I think, would have raised that point, so excellent point that it would have been, are that you can get face-to-face assessments, and you can ask for a taxi, and all travel costs are refunded, so there shouldn't be a reason to come out. And just very quickly, as I am conscious of time, I will try to pick on some of the points that members have made. The ones I missed, we will correspond. The Honourable Friend for the Cotswolds, a very proactive approach. I have gone to visit the Swindon Centre that we share. I'm encouraged by that. The Honourable Member for Workington, very good point about language. I would be happy to talk further about areas that we can improve. But carers allowance is backdated. That is important to remember. The Honourable Member for Aldermeath and Saddleworth, yes, we have strictly applied service credits, rightly so. Appointments can also be rescheduled, so if 9 o'clock in the morning isn't appropriate, and some centres are looking at changing their opening hours if that's what claimants want. And the full PIP review, we've done some of the recommendations. We will continue to look at that, and I will update members further. The Honourable Member for Torvain, it is evidence-based, it is sensitive to conditions, and we'll continue to learn. Quality is vital. The Honourable Member for Bridgend, Your personal experience is vital. Yesterday I did attend the motor neuron disease event. I'd be delighted to have a meeting both with them and Parkinson's, and I would extend that invitation to the Honourable Member. I think your experience would be vital in this. There are many other points I haven't had a chance to get to. I will quickly say on the rollout front, it will match capacity. It will be done in a calm and cautious manner. I welcome all the feedback. It's been a very proactive debate. This is a real priority for me, and I'll keep a very close eye.
Mr Stuart, you have 40 seconds or so to sum up the debate.
Well, can I thank members from across the Chamber for their contributions and the Minister for his extremely constructive response. One final message to those listening or viewing this will be to say, contact your Member of Parliament if there are any problems, because we will take it straight to the Minister and make sure that the aspirations the Minister rightly has are real and delivered on the ground, and we can all work together to make sure that happens so that disabled people everywhere are fairly treated.
The question is that this House has considered the processing of personal independence payment applications. As many of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.